you know, 60, 70, 80% of what I see as a primary care doctor upstream, the common denominator is stress.
Welcome, Dr. Dahmer. It's great to have you on the Archives podcast.
The beauty of integrative medicine is that it does not replace Western medicine in any way. It is a perfect overlay. It is a perfect adjunct. It enriches Western medicine in everything I do as a physician, and it brings attention to prevention, lifestyle, and something that we don't talk much about in medicine. That is the innate ability of each and every one of us to heal. Almost every culture that I visited and have read about understands that connection to others affects healing more than anything else. And I think that's something that we're tremendously missing.
So we're doing this.
We're podcasting. We're podcasters now.
Welcome, Dr. Dahmer. It's great to have you on the Archives podcast. For someone hearing the term integrative medicine for the first time, what does this actually mean, and what's all included within the integrative medicine practice?
Yeah, great question, Luke. I like to. I've practiced integrative medicine for over 20 years, and for me, the differentiator in it is that we really come from a focus of caring for the whole person. Oftentimes, in medical education, even in my career as a physician, you come to me with a problem and I fix it, or you come to me with a problem and I give you a diagnosis. And oftentimes, actually, 71% of the time, some research supports that ends or culminates in me prescribing a medication for you. Integrative medicine looks beyond that to the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. Growing research supporting mind-body connections, growing research supporting meaning and purpose and its role in our overall health. And we draw upon the best of both conventional and complementary, really looking to evidence. We follow the evidence as any physician would, but also keeping in mind what I was taught by one of my mentors, Dr. David Rakel, the potential for harm as well. And obviously, Dr. Andrew Weil has been a huge proponent of looking at harm and beginning with those therapies and interventions that have least harm first. And practically it includes everything: nutrition, movement, mind-body practices, meditation and Qigong, evidence-informed natural therapies, alongside pharmaceuticals, specialist referrals, surgery when they're needed. It certainly is a specialty. As you mentioned, I'm board certified in integrative medicine, but in many ways, it's also a philosophy of care that goes beyond any specialty.
So how does this integrate from almost like a day-to-day perspective? How does this integrate with traditional Western medicine?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things to discuss. Throughout my career, and even from a patient's perspective, but sometimes from a colleague's perspective, it's an either-or binary mentality of, I'm going to do holistic and integrative medicine, or I'm going to do conventional. This is a huge error. The beauty of integrative medicine is that it does not replace Western medicine in any way. It is a perfect overlay. It is a perfect adjunct. It enriches Western medicine in everything I do as a physician, and it brings attention to prevention, lifestyle, and something that we don't talk much about in medicine. That is the innate ability of each and every one of us to heal, a patient's ability to heal. How do we augment that innate ability to support the intervention that we might offer from a conventional medicine perspective? In conventional medicine, or in my job as a family physician, right? Oftentimes I will ask what's wrong, and integrative medicine might rephrase that in terms of what's strong related to your health, and how do we lean into that to support empowerment of the patient, to support their innate ability to heal, and to support their ability to come back to that balanced state, or what we call allostasis or homeostasis, which is innate potential for each and every one of us.
I want to dive into that too for a sec. Dr. Dahmer, you said the reframe is from what's wrong to what did you say there for in relation to
what's strong? Or another thing that we'll commonly say, and an article's about to come out where, and it's long been said, like, rather than what's the matter, what matters most to you? Imagine, right? Your physician asking those questions. And I'm very commonly asked, what's wrong and what's the matter? But oftentimes through my integrative lens, I'm trying to switch that to what's strong and what matters most to you.
It's very interesting. It's funny, before we did this podcast, Luke and I were talking a lot about just integrative medicine in general. And obviously we had researched a lot of the work that you had done. And it was shocking to us how this isn't more commonplace in a lot of people's lives, especially just given who wouldn't want to decrease their trips to the doctor or supplement their surgery after to make sure that the results stay longer or just make sure that their life is more fulfilled in so many ways, right? It seems like something that's so intuitive when you talk about that binary versus non-binary, that it's just so, it makes so much sense that this should just be added on to our traditional care. But it's shocking to me that it isn't something that is so commonplace today.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir, Cameron.
I'm sure, for
Which is,
sure.
again, many reasons that I'm here, but I need to speak. I need to be the face, and obviously Dr. Andrew Weil has been this face for 50 years, and sharing this message. What I'm sharing is nothing new, and it is really making those inroads. And I just would say, I mean, standing where I'm at as the director of the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, what enormous progress. The story is told that, integrative medicine started in the College of Medicine, Tucson, as a trailer kind of off campus. We now have, just a gorgeous mind, body, spirit complex embedded within the College of Medicine, Tucson, within the University of Arizona. And we just have made enormous progress. Those before me, moving from the margins to becoming a part of mainstream academic centers, large healthcare systems, even insurance models. And to your point, Cameron, we have so much further to go. Many still haven't heard about it, but the work that's been done, I like to say that I stand on the backs of giants, and we have so much further to go that I moved my family from New York to Tucson to lean in and to do just that.
Yeah, this field has come such a long way. And I'd love to hear even more specifically across things like research, access, adoption, and more like what has changed with integrative medicine and I guess what hasn't from those early years.
Yeah, I think, what has changed, one is the research that supports the work that we do. It really is just, inarguable to state that, and you look at many guidelines from major medical organizations, is that, lifestyle modification should always be our first approach in the vast majority of disease states. And the evidence only mounts further and further that this is the most important first step that we shouldn't look over. Unfortunately, we have been ingrained, in our system forces us to a 8-minute visit, maybe a little bit more if we're lucky, where oftentimes a pharmaceutical is the only thing that can be accomplished. And I have nothing against pharmaceuticals, but the
Yeah.
system still doesn't allow for us to practice the type of medicine many of us would like to practice. And the rigorous research that now supports meditation, anti-inflammatory nutrition, social connection, the things that we speak to in integrative medicine that oftentimes in many positions I've had as a family physician, I have to struggle to find the time to discuss that, because what hasn't changed is that tension between this paradigm shift and the practice. Our system rewards intervention more than prevention. And many people just still struggle to access integrative medicine. People struggle to access primary care in general. They struggle even more to access this type of care, to access a practitioner that can speak to this and will take the time to speak to this. And that really speaks to the broader challenge in just equity and wellness.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'd love to take a step back as well for you personally and understand kind of how did you get into this field of medicine? We heard you moved your family from New York to Arizona for this. Was there a moment for you when that kind of flipped where you realized this was a massive space that you needed to work in?
Yeah, great question. I think that it's always been in me. And I think you listen to people, and this is a similar story. My mother, I grew up in a small town, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and you can maybe hear it in my accent a little bit yet. I don't get rid of that, and I don't want to get rid of my Wisconsin accent. And
All roads lead back to Wisconsin.
all
Yeah,
roads
we
lead
love
back
Wisconsin here.
lead back to Wisconsin. And my mom would shop in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, at the food co-op, where we would get the peanut butter that had zero sugar. And I would go to a friend's house and eat Jiffy for the first time, and it would blow my mind. And I'd be like, "What is this?" And I still have trouble to this day pronouncing falafel, because falafel is what we called it, because we didn't even know what it was, trying to eat things that were healthier. My father is a first-generation Hungarian immigrant. We had a garden in our backyard every year that I grew up. I worked in that garden. I ate my vegetables from that garden and was connected to that soil and the plants that came from that garden. And I was incredibly active. There wasn't a sport that I didn't play. All those led to, and I'll be honest, I think in the medical profession, I'll admit I'm a bit of a black sheep. I was accepted to medical school out of high school. I don't have a doctor in the family. I didn't spend a lot of time with doctors, and that acceptance was a gift horse that I should not look in the mouth, is exactly what I was told. When I did finally get to medical school, I realized what an honorable, beautiful, incredible profession this is, and it really fit. I am a generalist at heart. I love looking at the forest. I love making connections between things, and was drawn at the University of Wisconsin Medicine to a very strong family medicine program. And my first year of medical school, Dr. David Kiefer gave a lecture on botanicals and integrative medicine. And it was an elective that I chose to attend. And right there and then I knew that this, in addition to the generalist family medicine, integrative medicine was exactly the direction that I would go. And I carved out a path, including residency at Beth Israel in Manhattan, which has a very strong integrative medicine program. And I was mentored by the likes of Dr. Red Schiller, Dr. Ben Kliegler, Dr. Robbie Lee, Dr. Woody Merrill, and many others that just really opened a path to show that this isn't fringe. This is the direction that medicine needs to go. And so my heart and my critical thinking, along with mentors, opened this path that, eventually led to even being the director, which still surprises me to this day.
Well, you're quite humble. I think Luke could certainly relate to growing up in Wisconsin with a mom who was having him eat all the healthy snacks, huh, Luke?
Yeah, definitely. It sounds very similar. Of people often ask, how did you go from this pure finance field and hockey and all these different things, and then how did you end up in this health and wellness category? And I often say the health and wellness category is actually the one that came first before everything else. So it's no shock that we're here doing what we are now, but you don't realize those things until you reflect on them, right? And so how you reflected on your experience growing up in Sheboygan, my experience growing up in Heartland, Wisconsin, you don't think about those things until you now see how the plan was supposed to unfold.
Yeah.
Well, and let's give a huge shout out to moms. I mean,
Yeah.
goodness,
True.
what would we do without them? And that invisible force, right? It's visible in so many ways, but they mold and craft us in ways that it takes 50 years to realize sometimes, in my case.
It's so true. It's so true. I want to dive into some other areas that you worked in as well. I know we mentioned this early on, Luke did in the intro, around the different areas you traveled and the work that you've done there. I think Brazil, New Zealand, Navajo Nation, Palau. I would love to hear, as you're traveling, what you were doing in these travels, what you were focusing on and wanting to get out of practicing in different communities around the world.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Cameron, and I think it was just an insatiable curiosity. Growing up in a small town and then, moving through from Madison to New York City, you just are wowed at how big the world is, how diverse the world is, how the single maybe perspective that you were afforded from your upbringing is one of a million. And it just lit this fire in me. And every time, and actually my first study abroad experience was as a junior in undergraduate, where I studied abroad in Madrid, Spain. I
Hmm.
studied at the Complutense. And by the end of the year, I forced myself and even my closest friends that we didn't speak a word of English. And I was dreaming in Spanish by the end of that year. And I came back and actually became a professional interpreter, which was a huge experience for me as an upcoming doctor. Imagine being, that conduit in language between a patient and their physician
Of course.
was a tremendous learning experience for me. But even more so, it just opened my world to other realities. And what we learn and what we experience here in the United States is just a small snippet of what occurs in the world. And each one of those, I think traveling is in many ways my drug of choice, because I just was placed almost in a high of seeing that, like, look at the way the world lives and the beautiful diversity that each one of those that you mentioned. It was an absolute gift for me to participate. And sometimes we come in as a physician and think that we know a lot, or we're going to impart something upon a culture or a society. And each one of those, I was the recipient of tremendous wisdom and knowledge of, if I were to put in one word, it probably is, fortitude
Hmm.
of community, of, what community can do to support an individual in the absence of a lot of money, medical technology, all of these things that we take for granted. And what an amazing job that community can do to support health and wellness, even in the context of extreme poverty. It really blew my mind to see that and to participate that, and then to become a part of that community in the best way I can, to lean into that energy that is one of service to a greater good that elevates everyone, because oftentimes there's no choice. You have to do that and become part of a larger group to survive. And coming back to the United States, and oftentimes it was a shock. We can
Mm,
be so individualistic. We can be isolated in so many ways, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this. It's really to our own detriment of the power of social connection and its importance in our health.
yeah. I'd be curious if you have any examples of how you saw community in some of these other places and the impact that that had
Oh,
on health.
goodness, how much time do you have? I'll give two quick examples, and
Yeah.
I hesitate to make them quick, but I will, just but they're so profound. The first was in Quatro Varas in Fortaleza, which is northeast Brazil, a very poverty-stricken area. Pirambu is the second largest favela in Brazil. Many know Rocinha, which is in Rio, because it's the largest and it's in many movies. But Fortaleza, just as dire. Amazing Brazilian psychiatrist named Dr. Adalberto Barreto created a comunidade de saúde. I'm throwing a lot of Portuguese words out there just for emphasis, but it's a
Yeah.
health community that they called Quatro Varas, because the story was that a father told his four sons to go out and grab a stick that he couldn't break, and the one that grabbed that stick would inherit the kingdom or the land. And each one got a hefty stick and tried to bring it back, and he broke every single one of those sticks. And then he told them all to go get another stick. And then he put the four sticks together, and he asked each and every one of them to try to break the four sticks together. And none of them could. And he said, see, when you stick together, that's where your true power is, not to divide into single sticks. So the Comunidade de Saúde was called Quatro Varas, four sticks. Dr. Barreto gave free psychiatric care to the residents of the favela. He realized he had a line of 200 people out his front door. And so what he did was institute what we now call shared medical visits. So in 1999, I had the pleasure and honor to witness a group of 60 amazing Brazilians in a circle in the Comunidade de Saúde in Quatro Varas, doing shared medical appointments, where he would look to me and he said, look how we all solve one another's problems through discussions back and forth of a group visit. And it just was so touching to me, of one, the innovation of looking outside the box of the one-on-one visit, that you're only going to touch one person, and then connecting with community to offer a visit that included, 40, 50, 80 people sometimes in this room, and he could, kind of work through that to make it almost like a medical visit, but with interaction between people. That was one story that totally touched me. And a quick another in Whanganui or Wanganui, which is the southern coast of New Zealand. I was a brand new doctor that showed up, and one of my earliest patients had severe eczema. And I was concerned, and I was wondering if there was something in the water or there was something that was going on. And I saw in the notes that there was a social worker. So I called just to try to gather more information. Unfortunately, this triggered a cascade in New Zealand that I wasn't aware of, that the doctor had called the social worker, where the next day the two parents walked into my office extremely angry. The mother had a beautiful Maori facial tattoo. I was intimidated. I, in my usual fashion, as a good Midwestern white guy, just explained I was concerned about their daughter. I meant no harm. I'll call back and say that there's no red flag to be raised, and they seemed to understand. But it was like my second day on the job, and this was a tremendous honor. Of probably 95% of my patients were Māori, and so I'm not starting out on a good foot in this community. I earned my way, showing up, practicing, very authentic style the best I could, trying to regroup from that. By the end of my year in Whanganui, there was a circle where they sang a song, and each person in that circle, and I would estimate, and I'll overestimate probably because it's such a beautiful story of 50 people in this story, each one is how I had touched their lives as a doctor, and gifted me a hand-carved whalebone necklace at the end of that year. And I was just felt to be such an integral part of that community, despite being an outsider.
Wow. That's That's absolutely incredible. I can't imagine what that felt like in that moment to know the impact of your work as well. That's
Well, and
amazing.
it felt like a gift because honestly, I felt like I received so much more than I could have given any one of those. And I used the best tools that I had, which are Western medicine and integrative medicine, to practice for me what is good medicine. And I think they recognized that and saw that here is somebody in service looking to help us and improve our overall health.
Yeah. The first story as well, just this concept of group medicine, I believe that was the phrase you used. I mean, it seems so foreign to us in how we experience this in the US. And I think this kind of feeds into my next question, just around, I think integrative medicine does such a fabulous job at looking at maybe some of the things that we intuitively feel, but we can't explain. And there might not be a reason that we know why do these things happen, but we all know that they seem to.
Yeah.
And one is around this concept that we're touching on, community versus loneliness and how that impacts someone's health. This is more of a sad case, but it's a common thing we've seen with when one partner dies, typically in their older age, the other one might follow shortly after. We've seen that, and we almost say this might be a broken heart, or that loss was a cause of that. But there isn't any science that at least Luke and I have seen around that, though we've seen situations like that in our own families. I'd be curious what you have seen in your work around this concept of the benefits of community or the struggles around loneliness and the impact on health.
Yeah, I think that for me, it's just has really shifted. And again, as a young medical student, I think almost all of us are. And as a young physician, you almost have to rely on biochemical pathways in a reductionist, evidence-based medicine to get you through. It's daunting, right? You're faced with death. You're faced with diagnoses that are extremely complex, and you have to lean on those areas that make the most sense, which are supported by logic and science and evidence-based medicine. As I
Yes.
mature more and more, and I think my travels have reinforced this, but healing isn't just biochemical and cannot be reduced to a single intervention. There's no silver bullet for that. And it's, the healing in many ways is relational, and almost every culture that I visited and have read about understands that connection to others affects healing more than anything else. And I think that's something that we're tremendously missing. And there have been huge strides in, even research really looking at measurable immune and inflammatory changes when we're isolated. Research studies showcasing that, moderate to severe social isolation is the equivalent of, a pack year smoking history, which is
Really?
remarkable. Yeah, to make it the equivalent of even smoking, which we all know is bad for us. I think the challenge with many of these things, and Cameron, I think you're spot on, is for me is how powerful these are. But it's tough to just write a script, right,
Yeah.
for social connection. It's tough to write a script for mind body, right? And still, yet we try to. I do it often. There are now, social RX is a movement, right? Community as medicine is a movement where we can almost write a script, but it has to be followed up. It's not as simple as taking a pill once a day or twice a day. And this is what we're trying to lean into, is because it's complex, because it's not as simple as writing a prescription, because there's not a billion-dollar blockbuster pharmaceutical on the other end of it, doesn't mean that it shouldn't be incorporated. And again, as an adjunct to all of those amazing things we do in Western medicine, what are the paths whereby we are making it easier for our patients and society in general to walk that path, to be connected with others, to spend more time in nature, to not be all day in a seat, to carve these into the society that we live in so that it can augment everything we do in
Yeah.
Western medicine, so that it can prevent so much of is overflowing our doors. And patients here in Tucson, it's at least a 6-month wait to see your primary care doctor. It's unbelievable to me.
Yeah, we've experienced that as well, and it's part of Luke and I's own journey as well. Was when I was thinking about starting a family and wanting to get things checked out on my end. It was very hard for me to get access to care from even a fertility sense. I'm very fascinated by these stories that you're sharing around seeing the impact that loneliness can have and the comparison there. I'd be curious, are there any biomarkers or any just metrics that you've seen be impacted by loneliness in any of these studies, separate from just mindset, right? Because I think it's hard for people to find this tactical and something that they can see and have the stats behind. I don't know if you've seen any studies that have been able to do that.
Yeah, I've seen those, but I honestly, Karen, this may feel like a cop-out, but I hesitate to go down that direction. Do we
Yeah.
need to prove that social connection is valuable for our health because, our CRP it varies in a certain way, or even
Sure.
our heart rate variability might improve by a certain number because we interact with others? And for me, this is the other thing as I get older and I'm getting a little bit more bold and confident
Mm.
that not everything needs a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial or a biomarker for me to say to a patient, hey, this is good for your health. And let's find ways to explore it more. And the beauty is I can still, check your heart rate variability. I check my own, right? And I geek out on those things. But I hesitate that that's the front line. The front line is connection is remarkable for our health. And again, some of the most moving research really even looks at mortality, right? Specific to that, which, is something that's important for all of us and its impact on that. And I like to, even with my patients, come through rapport and really building of a relationship to not only say that it's important, but really the art of medicine is to help a patient find a way that they can incorporate that into their life. And maybe I'll take a second because I've played a peripheral role in something that's been launched at the University of Arizona
Yeah.
that was called Art Pharmacy and now is called Social RX. And it's a really remarkable program outside the box where they have software and an app where a student will come into campus health and may screen positive for either loneliness, anxiety, depression, and they can be connected to an arts event in the community that connects with their interest, right? And not only are they connected with free admission to that arts event, right? That inspiring, creative, participatory at times arts event, but they bring someone with them along the way. And we're
Right.
watching very closely as this grows because obviously it's popular. And people get interested in this, but it impacts, those measures that are most important: loneliness, anxiety, depression, and other measures as well. And I think that one of the things I like to bring back through integrative medicine, and we just finished up a review on drumming and its impact, and the research that's been done on its impact in substance use disorder. But one of the fun things that we mentioned in that study that we don't talk about in Western medicine too much is that the intervention was fun.
You said drumming, as in
Drumming, yeah, drumming, yeah, 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 drumming
fascinating.
instrument and its impact, right, on social connection and other physiologic markers, and obviously substance use disorder and many of the things that might go along with that, including anxiety, depression, social
Yeah.
isolation. But rarely do we talk about, your fill in the blank of some drug, and I won't mention anything, but fun to take that medicine. But it is fun oftentimes to participate in a social interaction. It is fun to participate in an arts event in the community. It is fun to drum with others, not for everyone, right? But there is
Yeah.
that angle to it that the things that oftentimes we want to overlay on Western medicine have a fun, engaging, and social connection aspect to it that uplifts us.
Yeah. I think the concept of social RX is so fascinating. I'm sure it's amazing to be a part of it, and it's in real life social connection, because I think it's something we've seen a lot with the younger generation as well, specifically, is just how they might have more contact with people through social media, through video games, whatever it might be, than ever. And yet, at least what we've seen anecdotally, I don't have the exact stats on this, but seeing depression, social anxiety increase, right? Even though it
Yeah.
feels like we're more connected than ever. But it's not these kind of touch points that you're talking about, where there's in real life connection, going and doing something that brings you joy or challenges you. And I think that's just such an important conversation to be having with what sounds like what you all are doing through social RX.
Well, and what a what a sad state. I'll be very frank that again, it's the core of who we are as humans. We are social animals and social beings, and yet we know so little about it. And we're watching before our eyes as it's so negatively and drastically impacting our health, and yet we're not screaming with a red flag stating that we need to change some of these things. We need to address this, and certainly there are people that are doing that. And
Yeah.
again, I don't want to speak down to those that are, but as a society, to speak to that more, and I even think of my own children, and and again, how I could be doing even more as a parent, because you just watch as they go into that screen and they are missing out on the many things that we did as children, and we need to be speaking more vocally about that and changing that.
Yeah.
I want to go back for a second. You brought up randomized controlled trials. and how those are considered to be the gold standard of evidence-based medicine. But they're inherently designed to isolate a single variable. And so
Right.
what we're talking about right now in a lot of integrative medicine approach is things like community, meaning, belief, stress, relationships, all these different health variables. Can you talk about how we can approach this balance a bit? Like, how do we study something that it's inherently so multifactorial, when the gold standard is saying to isolate a single variable?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I appreciate that question, Luke, too. And I think it does tie back to, why is it an exciting time for integrative medicine? I am bullish, right, on technology, including AI, and it will be a double-edged sword, and we all know that. But I do think it will open mechanisms by which we can look at systems-based research, systems-based thinking in ways that we never could before. We can have multiple variables rather than isolate to a single for right a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial for a set point of time, right, that oftentimes is incentivized and has a set population that it's studying that you might question, does that even apply to me? And again, it's been amazing in the work that it's done, oftentimes, whether it's an antibiotic or an antihypertensive, to really showcase things that can improve our health. But I think we're on the precipice of going beyond that to look at more complex interventions like social RX or, many of these things that we are discussing to showcase a deeper, longer lasting positive impact on health and healing. And one thing I like to bring up too, and Dr. Andrew Weil is a big proponent of breath work. We're hearing a lot more about breath work these days, which is very exciting. When I started this training, you were kind of odd to look at breath work. And I actually interpreted, I don't know if I should share this or not, with Leonard Orr in Brazil, who was the founder of rebirthing. So I was front and center as the interpreter for Leonard Orr as I was traveling through Brazil on the rebirthing process. And I'll say the thing that I did see and learn was the tremendous power of breath, and certainly have gone on from that to practice breath work regularly in my own life. And what I love about some of these interventions, one, as I mentioned, is that it's not binary. They can overlay onto, even if a pharmaceutical is required for severe depression, it can overlay on that when done correctly. And what the beauty of it for me is the majority of pharmaceuticals that we do in the randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, the body builds tolerance to. That's just the nature of the receptor systems that exist within our bodies, that oftentimes we have to increase the dose and we develop a tolerance, or we may have to change the pharmaceutical. With breath work, the more that you practice it, the stronger its physiologic impact in our body. Right. And so the more that we work with it, the more of a positive or powerful drug it becomes in our body. And I think that our research as it is in its reductionist view is fantastic and has served us well. But to your question, the pendulum needs to start swaying back in the other direction. We've put all our eggs in a single basket for that blockbuster pharmaceutical on the other end. And again, I use GLP-1s like any other physician, but we put all of our eggs in that basket without looking at the lifestyle modification that might be harnessed when you finally get some momentum of losing weight, and what will lead to much better longer term outcomes. We have very few studies that will look at the whole lifespan of an individual. And those that have been done are fascinating. They're extremely hard to do, but we need to widen our aperture of what it means to be healthy, and our research to follow long term how these interventions are helping us overall in a bigger picture of health, not just our blood pressure, but again, that integrative view of mind, body, and spirit. Long-winded answer, Luke, but it's a complex issue, and I'm excited for new ways to look at health, empowered by moving that pendulum, and hopefully funds that support other types of research, as we're starting to see come out a little bit, but also looking at a whole person approach to health.
Yeah, it's really interesting the things that people today deem as okay versus not understanding all these different factors that go into it, right? So I think of someone's favorite quarterback that hurts something in their body, and the multifaceted approach that goes into reducing inflammation throughout the entire body. It's not just a surgical intervention, right? It's everything that happens leading up to that, everything that happens after that. And I think inherently in society, we've taken the approach of like, well, that just makes sense. Of course, you're going to do everything you can to be the healthiest version you can and come back the strongest that you possibly can be. And I think just looking at that very simple, isolated, easily understandable reference is also a really good way to look at this integrative medicine approach of breath work layered on top of a potential pharmaceutical. When you think about depression, it can only help. And so these are things that you can be doing that can be layered together and can be incredibly beneficial to all individuals.
Yeah.
One area that I feel like we just haven't cracked yet is this idea of stress. You spoke on it very briefly, but we use the word stress like it's one thing. You spent the time at the intersection of stress, immune function, healing. What have you seen from looking at stress through an integrative health lens?
Yeah, great question, Luke. And again, I might just add real quickly one thing is that, again, sometimes we have this saying in integrative medicine when, it's not our saying, right? But that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so
Right.
again, for us as physicians to learn that there are other tools that we can use to address, right? And our job is to best address a concern, a complaint. It's rare that a patient comes to us, hey, I want to augment my health. So, we use what we've been taught in many ways. And if we're not taught those other tools, it's hard for us to utilize. And many of the fellows that come and study at our fellowship at the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine are yearning for those other tools, are yearning for the evidence to
Yeah.
support offering these to their patients. And this is what we hear over and over again. And one other thing I just want to say too is that, it's a little biased. And I like the example that you give of like an elite athlete. The other truth is that, really what's seen in a hospital system is less than 1% of the population, right? And most of our medicine is based on kind of that extreme circumstance of the worst cases of insomnia or the worst cases of depression, which many of my colleagues as specialists will see. What we're trying to do in integrative medicine is move that needle upstream a little bit where that's, incredible intervention, which might feel even to some like a sledgehammer, but is needed because we're so far along the pendulum, we're not reaching people upstream. And I'm coming back to your question, Luke, in that, this is one of the biggest things of critical thinking for me as a physician that didn't make any sense is there are estimates, and depending on which research you look at, 60, 70, 80% of what I see as a primary care doctor upstream, the common denominator is stress. And
Wow.
there is also science that in primary care visits, around 2% of primary care visits will afford some way to mitigate, support, or help with that stress that our patients are facing. That to me is just what a huge disconnect that exists there when upstream for me, right? I can put the Band-Aid or treat the symptom, right? But that upstream common denominator, less than 2% of the time or 2% of the time, we're actually addressing. And what I found in 20 years of integrative medicine is there are remarkable ways to address that, right? And that can be from, walks in nature to breath work, to meditation, to, meditative movement. The list goes on, right? And the challenge sometimes is finding what might match the patient in front of me and then affording them a prescription whereby they can follow through on that. Or even more powerful, which I'm guilty of doing, is teaching a patient a breathwork exercise in a short visit and doing that with them to reiterate the importance of that this is something that can impact your physiology. This is a tool that empowers you. And this is something that allows you to go upstream sometimes to the 20 diagnoses I'm seeing you for today. And sometimes I have to do that out of necessity. I can't address all 20. I can help you go upstream to something that's a common denominator for that. And again, to prove that there's true efficacy on my breathing exercise for those 20 diagnoses is part of the challenge. 20 years of practicing has taught me that I'm confident enough that I'm going to share my time and that expertise to try to empower a patient to walk away with something that they can do, not just give them a medication that I'm doing from the outside.
I think it's so interesting talking about breath work as well. Luke and I, in the last year, have both done our first breathwork sessions as we've been just diving into a lot of things around fertility and then stress management. Big one for me personally. I absolutely loved it. It was a great experience. And it's good to hear you say, too, the more you do it, the more impactful it is. And it means we're due again. But for me, it was a huge thing for stress management was to be able to do some intentional time with like a lead breathwork session. And Luke, yours was like a guided one with reflection. I forget what your reflection was on, but it was a good session too.
Yeah, mine was looping back to mothers and putting. It was a really really beautiful breathwork session that we'll have to talk more about. But it was one of those ones that the impact it made of combining a thought around a loved one combined with a breathwork component. You can see why it's so impactful, and all these different modalities are things that we should be considering as we're looking upstream at what is really going wrong.
Yeah.
It's so even you just mentioned breathwork, Cameron, and it changes my breathing. And again, I'm all excited for the podcast. And you mention it, and my diaphragm kicks in. I take a deeper breath. I feel calmer. I'm more in the moment here with you. And maybe I've convinced myself of that over 30 years, but I truly feel that. To the point that Dr. Weil makes a point when we do breath work with our fellows that the literal meaning of the word conspire is to breathe together. And so, like we're conspiring together when we take that breath together. And I'm having conversations right now that we're trying to find a way to launch the world's largest breathwork clinical study to really start to showcase how accessible this is, how safe this is, how powerful this is, and that anyone that is amenable in any way to practicing this should be given the knowledge by which they can utilize something we're doing 16 times a minute every day, all day, without thinking, to offset the tremendous stress that exists in society and to help us live better, more powerful, more vital lives.
Wow.
I'm glad you guys found it, and make sure one of the biggest things is from patients. Oh, I got really panicked and I did your breath exercise and it didn't help. That's not when you should be doing it.
Yeah.
We should be doing it regularly. It's like any art or any practice. If you'll hit a plateau as well in the beginning, it's honeymoon. This is exciting. I've never felt this. You'll hit a plateau, and many people, like many endeavors in life, may fall off. You need to hold through that to reach that next level, and the levels will deepen and deepen and deepen over time, whereby your most stressful situation, your breath work will allow you that pause that doesn't allow your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight, to go off the rails, and allows you to rein it back in to say, we're okay, we're good here. And I can think a little bit more clearly on how to handle what this small or tremendous stressor is that's facing me.
No, I think it's incredible. It was a great experience for me. It was actually before South by Southwest is a big event here in Austin. A lot of people come into town. And so it was a group of women that got together before the craziness of South by Southwest to do this breathwork session. And it was great. It was a great design. I'd love to talk more about, this concept. You said the reframing of what's wrong to what matters. So what matters to you.
Yeah.
This concept of meaning and purpose. And we kind of touched on this around community and connection, but specifically on us finding meaning in our lives and us having this will to go on in a lot of ways. Have you seen research done on the impact of meaning and purpose in someone's life? And we kind of touched on this too around incredibly hard to prescribe, I'm sure, if there's a gap in that. But I'd love to hear, one, like, have you seen research in this? And two, what does that look like from a clinical sense?
Yeah, two great questions. I've seen solid research. Actually, for the first time this past year, we gave a lecture to the medical students at the College of Medicine, Tucson, where I was able to give a small section of meaning, purpose, and spirituality, and speaking to medical students about that. And again, it was well received. It's such a powerful factor. I've seen epidemiological data that links life purpose to lower mortality, as I mentioned before, better cardiac outcomes, improved immune function, all great things, right? And again, I think it comes back to that measuring those outcomes is very important for science and evidence-based medicine, that this is something we should double down and actually spend time, money, and energy on. But again, when you feel it, and a lot of things I do try to feel in my own life before trying to prescribe that or interact with a patient about that, it's remarkable. When you do that kind of self exploration of why am I here and where am I going? And I was very moved, and as I think many others were, by the work of Viktor Frankl, and just remarkable in such an
Yeah.
extreme circumstance to truly showcase that this focus on meaning and purpose can change even the most dire of circumstances into something that not only allows for survival, but allows for a form of mental clarity. And I think it's so underestimated and so underutilized. And back to your second question, Cameron, is, well, how do you implement this in a clinical practice, or how do we do it in society? Oftentimes we depended upon established religion to afford this angle, which, still oftentimes serves that amazing purpose, that connection, and that is the beauty. And I was raised Catholic by that same amazing mother that we discussed before, and really shaped me in very deep ways, and offered meaning and purpose to my life that I'm still realizing. But I think that, again, to implement this in everyday life, we have to be open to the question of what does it mean to do that, and what are ways that engage people on that path. And it was a big lesson for me as a physician that when I found the right patient, that you can almost, and I hesitate to say it, but it's true, you can almost feel that they're in an existential crisis, that there is so much just coming at them, that question, and we ask in all of our intakes at our integrative medicine clinic, if, whether you practice a form of religion or spirituality, and kind of what gives you meaning and purpose in your life. So it's a question that I can sometimes even refer to into the intake and lean into that a little bit. And I'm guilty of my prescription sometimes being a poem or a prayer.
Mhm.
And I just saw a patient this past week that a year and a half later, I sometimes like to ask that question: is there anything that I've given you that's been helpful? And one of the things that she said is that I mentioned to her the Serenity Prayer. And again, that wisdom to know the difference is something we all struggle with, and to be reminded of that on a regular basis was extremely powerful for her, because there was a life circumstance, and I won't go into it, but that was outside of her control, it was causing tremendous angst, tremendous depression, really negatively impacting. And the serenity prayer for the right person is a remarkable reminder. I can only do right what is my half of this equation.
Yeah. I think it's so special you're talking about the Serenity Prayer. I had the privilege of spending this last weekend Easter with my grandmother, who is one of the most inspiring women in my life, by far. And her and I actually, funny enough, were talking about Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And I think 17 years ago, my grandfather passed, and they had known each other since they were in second grade. I mean, you've never seen a love like this. They were
Mm,
completely in love. She still speaks in wheeze. And that loss was one of the most challenging things for her. And for her, a big thing was finding meaning, and a lot of times in that grief. And I believe in that book, he talks about the privilege of memories,
yeah.
and how when you're young, you have so much potential for what's going forward and you have dreams, but what a gift it is to have memories and to have things that have truly happened, and those are concrete, and to have those in your heart. And her and I were talking about this, and funny enough, she also was talking about the Serenity Prayer and what that has done for her in her life, and how much that has helped her through so much, and through that grief of being able to control the things that you can. And that is the wisdom to know the difference, I believe, right? I do think that is such a beautiful thing when it comes to meaning in general.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, Cameron. Thank you for sharing that. My Grandma Ginny, went through a similar, kind of path, and really reconnected to her. I have a laminated prayer that she gave me, that just reminds me she passed, but very, very powerful. And again, I think it's hard for me that, like, religion is over here and health is over here, and many try to connect, but in our modern paradigm, they are so distant. And again, many critics will be, well, who's got time for all of this? Who doesn't have time if it's a valuable tool in helping my patient, right, really find their best whole person, mind, body, and spirit health? Why
Yeah.
am I at least not speaking to that? And I might not be the expert, just like I have to in many other ways. I may have to refer to elsewhere, but the art of medicine is to elicit that as something that could be tremendously impactful, and help somebody find the path whereby they can walk that direction, and feel the remarkable benefits of prayer.
I'd be curious to understand what you're seeing or exploring personally in the fertility space, not just clinically, but What is some of the stuff that the research is pointing toward for both men and for women?
Well, and I have to put a disclaimer, you're speaking to a generalist, so a
Yep.
family physician here as well. But, again, that's the beauty of my work is there are areas that, there are a few areas that I don't get to touch. And fertility is front and center for so many of my patients. It's such an incredible topic. And I'll give a nod to technology and fertility and the tremendous strides that have been made. Look how many families, women that have been helped, right, with the technology that exists. The criticism from an integrative lens is that, again, the further we double down on a reductionist viewpoint, we think that there is kind of a one size fits all, or only through technology will we impact the fertility of both men and women. And, what I look at is the impact of environment, nutrition, stress, hormonal rhythms on overall fertility. That fertility, we can utilize technology to improve that. But what fertility truly is a mirror for overall body coherence. It's a
Mm.
mirror for overall health. And there are exceptions to that, right? And again, I want to be a little bit careful with that because I think one of the criticisms of integrative medicine is that, oh, I'm not fertile because I don't meditate enough or I don't exercise enough. That's not what I am saying. What I'm
Yep.
saying is that body coherence and contributing to that, for that to be a goal and something that we're actively pursuing will improve the fertility of any man or woman. And again, it might be a tiny amount and it might be a large amount, but that aspect of our whole person health cannot be forgotten in the pursuit of fertility. And again, inflammation, stress is going to impact sperm count, is going to impact ovulatory balance. And I see it day in and day out in clinical practice.
Yeah. I think it's such an interesting conversation because it's a common thread throughout what we've been chatting about today of just the multifactorial element of this and that it simply can't just be one thing. And for us at Ties, that's been the endeavor, the mission to make it far beyond just a supplement for men's fertility, that it needs to be an entire comprehensive approach of education around all these elements you just talked about. How we're re-navigating stress. What are we eating? What are we consuming in many other ways, right? And looking at that because it truly is so multifactorial in that sense. And it's agree with your sentiment as well around how modern science has had some amazing innovations around fertility and it's changed lives and brought babies into the world for couples who could have never imagined to have a child. And it's amazing. And I think it's also great to think about all the things that we can do to make sure we're in a good place to start a family.
Well, and Cameron, I might be interested if you're willing to share, from my perspective, is this idea of patient empowerment. And again, I see a lot in women's health where just so much is done to you, right? And almost in some ways a passive recipient to these things that are occurring. And for me, the beauty of fertility and having children of my own is the participation and that active participation in the process and the thought that there are things not that are it's my fault I'm not as fertile as I could be because I'm not doing them right, but the flip of that is that there are things I can do to augment our chances of conceiving that are evidence-based and that empower me more than being a passive recipient.
Yeah, I think it deeply resonates as well for me. Early on, there was just a lot of fear. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of women my age have fear around this. I think we've seen a lot of the scary stats that are out there around fertility. A lot of us, me personally, I didn't have a period for many years where I thought, okay, this means I might have trouble conceiving. And I'm not alone in that experience as well for a lot of young women where you just start to see a lot of warning signs. The fear can be crippling in some sense where you want to just get answers and you want to figure that out. And I personally found a lot of peace in starting to take the steps and in the research that Luke and I were doing to know, all right, I can change my diet. I can cut certain things. I can also go and get insights and do a full blood panel and understand where I'm at. But I think your word empowerment is the right word choice here of you're able to at least have boxes you can check to make sure you're doing all the things that you can control. If we even talk about the serenity prayer, to know that we're doing certain things. And that reframe for Luke as well. And Luke, I don't want to speak for you, but on the men's side was a similar sentiment of
Right.
he didn't well, Luke, go ahead. But you didn't want to just stand there as well while
But
I was
and
doing
I
that.
ignored you, Luke. I'm sorry. I focused all on Cameron, and that was very unfair. That was
No, I
unfair.
mean, look, this podcast is separate from ties, but it's interconnected in the fact that what we're building and the movement that we're trying to bring into the fold here as a team, all of us, is a active participation in one's health and the things that they care about, right? And so that is a lot of the entire premise of what we have been trying to build. It's not just a best in class supplement that will help with different reproductive parameters. It is this entire approach that we believe that men want to show up and want to proactively participate in this and be doing the things that can help with their fertility journey. And we believe that that is a really powerful movement that people will enjoy, something that is one of the most beautiful things in life, which is your family and building that. We believe that men want to be a part of that, but they just haven't been talked to, and they haven't been given a lot of the information, and they haven't been talked to in an approachable way around all the different things that you can do that also help with your overall wellness, right? Fertility and sperm parameters in particular, a lot of people are talking about them as like a sixth vital sign now, that it is closely linked to your overall health.
Yeah.
And when we started talking about this and Cameron was doing all of these different things, that really was the precipice for me of, is there anything that I can do or should be doing or should be thinking about? And it was coming from someone that, I live in this health and wellness sector and was a former athlete. And so I like to take good care of myself. And as you learn all of these other things, you start to feel like you are participating, right? Like I'm not
Mm.
going in the hot tub the same way, which is something I never would have thought of before. And I am looking at different things with my diet and cutting out alcohol and all these other factors that you can do that help this whole full body approach to being the best version of yourself and showing up.
Yeah, I love that, Luke, and thank you for sharing that. And I think that, that's a key reason why I'm here is, again, what excites me about ties is that commitment to proactive health and really moving upstream in that and calling out the importance of that. And, just as a father, as a husband, as a son, as a male, right, in our society is, I think we can do better and we want to, and we're looking for right platforms whereby we can participate in positive ways is
Yeah.
in part what I hear you saying too. And it resonates so deeply with me. And I appreciate that, Ties is really taking this head on and speaking to it because we're not talking about it enough. And I applaud that.
Thank you for saying that, Dr.
Thank you.
Dahmer. Um, to close out, we have just a few questions to dive into. One, I would love to know for you personally, what is bringing you meaning in your daily life today? We talked so much about meaning today. I'd love to know for you what that looks like.
Yeah, I'm going really, really small these days, waking up, doing qigong. My daughter celebrated her 13th birthday yesterday. Happy birthday,
Wow.
River. And, time with the family and, a smile on her face. These tiny little things, a walk through the wash here in Tucson, which is just glorious. A sunset and the colors changing on the mountain. Really, really unbelievable. And the belief that these, tiny moments of connection and awe are just so powerful for my own vitality to show up and participate. I'm just really leaning into those things. Again, I have big picture goals as I must, big picture vision as a center director.
Yeah.
But what's sustaining me from within on a daily basis are, those tiny little moments of putting my favorite record on and sipping some matcha and just reveling in that moment, or holding my son's hand, who will still hold my hand as we walk to the store. Even as I just share these, like I can feel it in my body, this good feeling that, what tremendous meaning that gives.
No, it's beautiful. Luke and I keep talking about how we need to make sure we keep our sense of wonder throughout different things. This was actually me convincing him that he still needs to read non-fiction books because he only reads nonfiction. I said, we all need to have some good stories in our life. We need a sense of wonder. Go back to Narnia or something, which he loved as a kid. I also would love to know, what's the record you put on? You said put on your favorite record.
In the Heart of the Moon is what I'm going to right now. I love it. I love music. So
Yeah.
I could talk for hours, and I do I do utilize the music streaming where you just got the world at your fingertips, but
No
In the
doubt.
Heart of the Moon is just been an absolute go-to where I could put on the whole record and it's magic to my ears. That's been my go-to lately.
Love it. And our final question here, we love to ask each guest this, and this can be across any context of your life. It doesn't need to just be around health, but what would be your best piece of advice to give the world?
I think it's the advice I've been giving myself a lot lately
Mm,
is,
good.
we're a fast-paced society that, we're constantly do, go, 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 do every minute, do, slow down.
Slow it down. I love it.
Take a deep breath. Slow down. Listen to the bird singing and listen to others carefully. Give full attention and just slow down and be in that moment, which I'm really trying to do. And again, I think it's how does our society set us up for success? Right now, our society is just go, 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 go. And we wonder why, we're in this fight and flight and kind of burnt out, tired and wired at the same time state because we're constantly in that state as opposed to
Yeah, I love it. That's a great one. One I certainly could apply. Huh, Luke? I think we both could.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I think that's an awesome way to end it. Dr. Dahmer, we can't thank you enough. This has been such an insightful, inspirational, and hope-driven conversation that I think a lot of people will reflect on and be really motivated in how they're showing up as the best version of themselves. So with that, that's our Ties podcast.
Thanks again.
thank you.